Kirsten's previous film, Camera Person, was named one of the New York Times top 10 films of 2016. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was shortlisted for an Academy Award. Her camera work appears in the Oscar-winning film Citizen 4, the Academy Award nominee The Invisible War, and the Cannes Film Festival Award winner Fahrenheit 9/11. In Dick Johnson is Dead, Kirsten tries to keep her 86-year-old father alive forever. Utilizing movie-making magic and dark humor, she celebrates Dr. Johnson's last years by staging fantasies of death and the afterlife. Together, dad and daughter confront the great inevitability awaiting us all. After its premiere earlier this year at Sundance, the film was awarded a special jury award for innovation in nonfiction filmmaking, and it just recently was awarded 2 Critics' Choice Awards, including Best Director. Dr. Eelco Wadix is a neurologist and a film lover who melds these passions into brain research. He is a stellar example of how medical humanities enriches the practice of physicians and ultimately improves patient care. He is professor of neurology at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and founding chair of the Division of Critical Care Neurology at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. His newest book is Cinema MD, A History of Medicine on Screen, where take a look at Kirsten, at her screen. She's got the book there. It just came out. He covers 400 films in this book. It's amazing. He is also the author of Neurocinema, When Film Meets Neurology. Kirsten and Dr. Wadix will chat for about 40 minutes, and then we'll leave 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please hold off on your questions for now. And when we're ready, you can put questions into the chat, and I'll help field those to Kirsten. Kirsten, take it away.
Oh, Andy, Zubin, thank you so much to Reimagine for creating this space for all of us to talk tonight. I was incredibly thrilled when I got an email from Dr. Wadix, who was interested in reviewing Dick Johnson is Dead for The Lancet. And, you know, as a filmmaker, we have an ecosystem, which is the world of other filmmakers and people who, you know, are interested in documentaries, people who are interested in film. But one of my greatest hopes in making Dick Johnson is Dead was that I could reach beyond just the cinema community into other worlds. And so when I got this email, I was like, oh, a neurologist from the Mayo Clinic is reaching out to me. Dr. Wadix, I'm so curious, how did you find Dick Johnson is Dead, and what about it made you want to write about it?
Thank you, Kirsten. I knew you already from Camera Person, which I told you I have in my collection, and enjoyed very much. So I was looking forward to Dick Johnson is Dead, also because it had very good reviews, and because it's about a topic that is of interest of mine, particularly the showing how early Alzheimer's disease presents itself. So I watched the movie, and then I knew I had to write about it. So I asked the Lancet if they were interested, and they were immediately interested after they saw the trailer. And then I thought, you know, it's difficult for us to contact filmmakers, as I told you. Certainly had a lot of unanswered phone calls, I can tell you. And but I was pleased that within 5 minutes I got an email back from you after I knew that you were teaching at NYU, and so I wanted to know more about the movie, how it was conceptualized, but also I felt that you need to be part of this review in general, have some idea of or have some say about the review of the movie. I can go on and tell you what I think is so special of the movie. I think the special part is that it rarely occurs in the documentary film, but also in fictional film a bit. But more in documentary film, that the early signs of Alzheimer's is displayed. Usually it's at the end. And this movie showed very clearly how difficult it is to recognize it. You have a highly functioning person that then suddenly makes a mistake, and it's attributed to being tired or a difficult, stressful period. But then something happens that cannot be attributed to that. And that is exactly how you displayed it and how it often occurs. I also felt that the fictional deaths were so realistic in the sense, apart from the falling air conditioner, is that these were all situations that people who have cognitive disabilities would get into trouble and would have a little accident that leads to a lot of problems. I think you also alluded to it, that your mother, who also unfortunately had Alzheimer's disease, passed away after a hip fracture. So something happens that initially is not all that tragic or difficult, but then one thing leads to another, and it becomes very often difficult for these patients to recover from that. We see that all the time. We have patients who come in with strokes, who have cognitive disabilities, and we often have to make the decision: is what we're doing here, the aggressiveness of our care, necessary and helpful, or are we just postponing the inevitable, what we like to call a natural death or a natural evolution of the illness that they have suffered from. So I think it is such a unique film in the entire scope of documentaries on Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and therefore I felt this needs to be seen, and I congratulate you with that, because I think it's a brilliant film and very well done, that's. I felt I had to write about it. I cannot write about every movie that I see, and I will not. So it's a bit of a selection, but it's this one is definitely one of the favorites of this year.
Well, Doctor, I mean, I learned through your book how impressive your selection of films is. There is not a topic in medicine that Dr. Widges is not connecting to films that exist. And I can tell you, in this compendium of reviews, but also sort of like centering us around what is it that doctors mean to us? What do we project onto doctors? What do we hope from them? I went through this like incredible list of contents where it's just like, you know, he's got chapters like death and dying, the good, bad, and the assisted, mental illness, crazed, hissy fits, and a couch. You know, on and on and on. He's got all of these fantastic ways of like looking into what goes back and forth between cinema and medicine. And I love that both of us say, we wish to reach across the divide to each other. You want to find filmmakers. I wanted to find doctors in this process. And, you know, just in thinking about tonight, you know, you are here, you're someone who's on call every other week, and you're in the intensive care unit with people who suffer from brain injuries. And right before we got on this call, everyone, he was just saying it takes him about 4 or 5 days to decompress from the world of intensity that he is in, thinking about how to give the best care, also how to communicate with the families of people. So I thought for our talk tonight, I wanted to think about, one, the person themselves and what are they experiencing. Two, the sort of the medical relationship to what's happening, and 3, the close people who are experiencing the disease that is unfamiliar to them, who then try to interface with medical or caregiving professionals to have a sense of what's going on. And when I was making Dick Johnson is Dead, I was informed, like you're all saying, by my mother's Alzheimer's that had come before. But I really am interested in what you're saying, Dr. Wojcik, about how it's rare to see the early onset of Alzheimer's or dementia in a film, because mostly people aren't paying attention at that moment. And I wasn't paying attention because I didn't want to see it. Even though it was familiar to me, I didn't want to see it. So I thought one of the first things that would be fun for us to talk about is denial and all of our relationship to denial and death. So as a doctor, you've got both the patient themselves and the family of the patient. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the nature of denial in the work that you do between the patients themselves and the families?
Yeah, so denial is very prevalent, obviously. What I see are patients that are generally doing well in the morning and then are on the ventilator in the afternoon. And that can be throughout every age group. That's a difficult situation because it's unexpected. If someone has a certain illness and then a progression is there, it's a bit more anticipated. But if it suddenly occurs, that is an enormous shock to every family member. And we have to acknowledge that, and we do, and then support the family in trying to navigate between what is real and what is hope. Everybody would hope that things will turn around or will get better, and sometimes it does. Neurologists are always thought of that they are just the only thing they do is predict doom, but they don't. We are also the ones that try to find who are the persons that have a fighting chance to get out of that catastrophic situation. So denial in family members of what is happening is very natural. Everybody would be in that situation would think, well, this is not happening to me, or this will probably get better. And so we see that all the time. And we have to figure out, is the family ready for the reality that this person that they knew in the morning doing well during breakfast now suddenly is disabled and will be, and can recover, but may never be the same person. And that depends a little bit on who that depends on what kind of family you're talking to. There are some families who would never want to give up and would want to continue care as best as we can. Sometimes even against our best outcome prediction. There are also family members who are far more realistic and understand what is happening and would go back and think, what would my loved one want to do? Our approach has changed dramatically over the years, fortunately, and I've been part of that, seeing that the transformational change in which the so-called paternalistic doctor who would say, this is what we need to do, and this is my opinion, goes now into sort of a shared opinion with family members and discussing with them what is it that you would like to do, but not only what you would like to do, have you in the past some sort of conversation with your loved one that gives you a bit of an idea what this person would want to do if something would struck him or her. We have advanced directives, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't have advanced directives, and young people certainly have no advanced directives. So it will be very, very difficult to judge that. And still, it takes away some of the burden of the families to say, let's have not you make the decision or we make the decision, but let's try to figure out what would that person, your best guess would want to do in that situation. That remains a guess. We never would know that unless we had a very frank conversation, and nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to really, we talk about resuscitation, but we don't talk a bit about what would you want to do if you can't speak or can't read or can't walk, or you need 24-hour nursing care, or you may not be aware, or perhaps only fragments of awareness occur throughout the day. And you live in a moment, you don't know what is happening, you forgot everything you've done. Would you want to live in that situation? And I have these conversations very frequently. We are not trained to do that, really. It's something that comes at you over many, many years. And we now have situations that we can, in simulation centers, can train and have actors, strangely enough, full actors who would play certain different approaches, how families would respond to it, from denial to acceptance, and train yourself how you would guide family members through those difficult decision making. It's a major improvement over time, rather than coming into an office and a doctor says, this is what we need to do. It's now a far more open and shared discussion, which is really, really a major improvement, as you can imagine.
Oh my goodness. It sounds like, and would you say you started your career in that space where you like had to walk into
a bit in that space, yeah. And that space still exists. I'm not saying that it all has disappeared. It depends also a bit of which country you are in. Some countries are more up to snuff than others, if I may say so. But in general, this has been I've seen that transformation really happening. Is that the doctor knows best idea is challenged, because sometimes doctors don't know best. Certainly not when it comes to discussions on how a family member should be supported, and what can be tolerated. Sometimes families are able to tolerate or feel that they can tolerate a lot, and then it turns out to be too much. There are also families who feel that they can handle it, and they can handle it well, and the person itself also seems to handle it well. The problem we often face is that in the injury that we see, which is stroke or traumatic brain injury or infections, the person may walk out of the hospital, but there's something happened, and it is not entirely the same person as it was afterwards, and that leads to sometimes depression, not be able to function very well, not hold a job, change a job, and sometimes epilepsy or seizures occur that have to be treated. In traumatic brain injury, there are quite a few young individuals who have major behavioral problems. With major behavioral problems comes new addiction that all have to be taken care of. I don't do that. These are the neurorehabilitation physicians who have a major, and their teams have a major task in guiding them through these difficult times. So it's a complex situation.
It sure is. I mean, I think the list of things that you said of like, what would you want to live if you couldn't do this, if you couldn't do that, with my father, he has been able until this time to acknowledge his own dementia, which was not true in my mother's case. And I think, both of them would have said, I don't want to live previous to their dementia and their Alzheimer's, they would have said, I don't want to live being a burden to other people. But of course, now you have my father who, needs 24-hour care, who says, oh, you can kill me anytime you need to, just run it by me before you do it, because I actually am kind of enjoying myself. And, when he says something like that, the him who created his advance directives no longer exists, right? And also, I would say, even in this time of COVID, my brother and I went to his advance directives, and he said, I don't want to be put on a ventilator in his advance directives. But now it's like, oh, if he got COVID, we would actually want him to be put on a ventilator for his comfort, we think, but we don't really know anything, right? So it's so interesting to me how all of these things are like hypothetical until they're not. And sometimes you can't consult the person themselves.
No, and advanced directives is a legal document with a lot of legalese in it, and it says, and they are not telling you exactly what you want to do. It's always about, if I have a terminal illness. But we now know that terminal illness almost has become a chronic illness. For many years, people can be in a very difficult situation, but still can enjoy things. Is the person that has advanced dementia in a nursing home with 24-hour care, is he suffer with that? We don't know that. And you may come in and you would see that someone has is enjoying music, for example. There was a wonderful film a few years ago about how important it is to realize that the music perception of people with advanced directives is still there, and when you're in your 90s, you would still want to listen to those 50s oldies and really get excited about it and happy about it. So it's very difficult for us, for anyone, to make those assessments. On the other hand, they're also, in an advanced directive or in conversations, very clear that families feel that person would not be able to handle a major handicap, because that's what he always wanted to do, and he can't do it, and that would be devastating for him, and we should not do it. Families often say, I don't want him to be a, quote, vegetable, which is a very broad definition of what families mean with that. We vegetative state, which is not the same as quote, being a vegetable. People who are in a devastating state can still be aware. In a vegetative or who are disabled can still be aware. Patients who are in a vegetative state are not aware. So all these definitions of how we want to classify outcome are very fluent and not arbitrary in a sense, as you can expect. So we have to, and therefore those decisions are very difficult. They are kind of difficult, and the best thing we can do is tell the family that it is difficult for us too. Yeah. And that we cannot just say, oh, this is so easy, this is black and white, and I know exactly what's going to happen. And if you want a percentage, here's the percentage. Well, 5% bad out, or say 5% good outcome is a lot for a lot of people. For us, it's 95% poor outcome. And so it's difficult to put a number in it. It's on it. It's difficult to judge those situations, and you cannot make it any better other than just trying to individualize it for that particular person. Come back to what is it that you would want? What is your best judgment of that? When you talked about in the film, asked him about euthanasia, and then he said, well, you can do it, but just run it by me. I thought it was one of the most comical answers I've never heard, ever heard. But it's an issue, is that everything you say now may be very difficult or different when what you say later, and it's all just very momentary when you sign those events. And the same comes with resuscitation. We have situations that people want to be do not want to be resuscitated, and then say, "Oh no, I think I should be resuscitated now," or vice versa.
I can imagine. You know, I'm just looking in the chat, and a woman named Iris is saying, "What if we spent time talking with family members and saying, what are your 3 wishes for the end of your life, in addition to the advanced directives?" And I think one of the things that strikes me in what you're saying about the family's best judgment about what the person needs, you know, I think we, the family, are attached to who the person has been. And we don't know yet anything about the person's capacity for change. And I will say, like, you know, this week I'm like so sad my dad's not going to be with me for Thanksgiving because he is now in a dementia care facility. But I called him today and he was like, "Oh, how are you? You know, it's so pleasant where I am. I'm sitting here talking to somebody and we're just having a lovely time sitting in the sunshine." And it was like, wow, I'm really attached to the idea that he needs to be with me at Thanksgiving. And in fact, he's having a great time. He's fine where he is. And I think those are the kind of transitions that become challenging for family in certain ways, like to imagine the person as different. I want to transition and ask you about a completely different thing. And while we're doing this, I do want everyone in the chat to put down how you wish to die. But Doctor, one of the things that I think your specialty of neurology and traumatic brain injury like puts you in contact with so often is a question I asked myself a lot while making this film is, what is a self? And, you know, when I was trying to make the film and feeling like the dementia was ahead of me and I'd already sort of lost who my father was, I was really worried that we weren't going to convey the essence of him in the film because it felt like it was already sort of fleeting and disappearing in front of me. But then deep into the making of the film, you know, we saw one cut and I was like, oh, we got him. We got his essence. Like, even though he doesn't know what time it is, he doesn't know where he is, he can't drive a car, he can't take care of himself, he is his wonderful self. And so I'm just curious about how you think about the idea of self, given how much brain injury you have seen and how you've seen people transformed when their brains are injured. What do you think about the idea of self? What is a self?
Yeah, so I don't know. And the good news is that nobody knows. There have been libraries written about consciousness. We do not deal much with consciousness. We deal with unconsciousness. We know why persons become unconscious, but what we don't know is the spectrum from unconscious to conscious, to be aware, to know what is happening, and sometimes don't know what is happening. I don't know what happens if you, and we really don't know what happens in the mind if it is acutely, this part of the brains are destroyed. We as neurologists are able to find and localize brain function and say, well, this patient is not noticing the left part of his body, that space is gone, is not oriented there, or is unable to speak. Or is unable to put things together, has lost memory, cannot retain any memories. We know where that all is, but your self and who you are is one of the biggest mysteries, and we don't know much about it. For example, I don't know what's in someone's mind if there's a catastrophic hemorrhage in the brain, or if parts of the brain are destroyed, what's happening. I do know that in patients who come in a very sick situation and then are recovering and do recover, is that many of them have no recollection of being in the intensive care unit. Sometimes not even no recollection in the hospital itself. Is possibly because we give them medication sometimes to keep them calm or to have them sleep. But boy, they don't remember much of it when that has happened. And that's fortunate, I think, that's occurring. But I don't know. We often ask yourself what is happening if you are more in the situation of your parents, in which it's as I call it, sort of a death by 1,000 cuts. There's every time something disappears, and how a person notices that, and how this eventually is not noticed anymore. Because there will be a moment that the person is not aware that something is wrong. The problem is that there is sort of a transitional period in which there are moments of lucidity in which someone knows exactly, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And you show that in the film too. There's a scene in which your father was alone watching television while during the Halloween
Yes.
night. And he said, oh dear, I'm your wreck father, or something like that.
Yeah, your father's really losing it. Yeah.
Your father is losing it. So
Yeah.
he knew he was not himself, and he knew that there was something changing. But I don't know how that is handled. How do people handle that? Because I think you probably noticed that the next moment he's forgotten about that, and it's not something that would continue to be on his mind. I think if we would be fully cognizant of everything we do, then we would think about it for weeks. What happened to me? How can we explain this, that I did this? And that's not happening. So there's sort of a lack of correction too, and that builds itself up. So if you ask me where is the self, I cannot give that answer. I wish I could. I don't think it is a sort of it's going to be a news flash. Oh, Dr. So-and-so found where consciousness is, and he's already signed up for the Nobel Prize. But it's and I don't know if we ever will be able to do that. And I come from a different side.
What I love about the way you speak and also what's in your book, I have to say, is that you admit lots of not knowing, but you also have like really specific and precise information that, like what you just said to us, my father didn't go on saying, wow, what happened to me that Halloween night? Why couldn't I remember where I was? It was in that moment and then it disappeared, right? So like you even saying that in some ways gives me comfort that he is not preoccupied with what he has lost, right? I'm loving reading what people are putting into the chat about, some people are talking about ideal deaths. Lots of people are saying, I don't want to experience pain. And I have to say, after the work I've done with my father on this film, I sort of feel like pain is just an intrinsic part of loving people, like that we can't get out of this life without experiencing pain, because we leave this life and we must separate from people we don't want to separate from. So I'm just curious, doctor, like your relationship to people's wish to not experience pain, or for their loved ones to not experience pain while dying. And then I think probably we better open it up to some questions because the time is flying. So if anyone wants to ask a question, if you'd put it in the chat while the good doctor speaks to us a little bit about pain and desire to not.
That's a terrific topic and not so easy. I think what we what we now know is that we probably feel that too many people are in pain and giving them too much medication. In my world, it's difficult to know if someone has pain, and we judge that by clinical signs such as temperature, or the blood pressure goes up and the heart rate is high, and then we give medication. But we also have noted that over time, pain management has become too aggressive, and sometimes even led to addictions, as you know. Eliminate all pain with the tremendous cost. That is fortunately changing. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people who left the hospital with enormous amount of opioids that led to addictions. It's not only us or we, as in the royal we, but there was a concern. Suddenly, pain was seen as a vital sign, meaning it's the same as your blood pressure, the same as temperature, the same as breathing, the same as your normal functions, and therefore it had to be seen and immediately treated. So what we do is we only treat pain if we think that there's a perception of pain as best as we can. So someone who's comatose, you won't put patient on pain medication because you think that the patient might be in pain, and which has disappeared if someone is comatose. But if someone has all kinds of other signs that would suggest that the patient is in distress, we have, of course, the obligation to treat that and to help that. So it's a complex topic, and the things we probably have over-treated over the last decade, and now going back to a far more measured way of doing it.
You know, it's so you're so open in your capacity to critique how medicine has been practiced. And someone asked whether my dad's personality or his life experience was part of why he was able to be open to his dementia and to take it in and not. And I don't know that, because I think of my mother as an open person too, and she wasn't able to do it. She wasn't able to be self-aware in her dementia. But I do hear in what you're saying, as a person, that it's the experience, the process of being a doctor and being in these conversations with people that has led you to wish to do things differently or to imagine doing things differently. And there was someone who asked a lovely question about how do we encourage doctors to be like you in the capacity to imagine having open conversations with families about advanced directives. And I'm just curious, like, what are the obstacles to having these conversations? Is it simply time? Is that one of the problems, that it takes time to have these kinds of conversations with families about? I'm stopping, go.
Yeah. So yes, time is definitely an issue, as you can imagine. I always feel that if you have no time to have a conversation, you should not have a conversation. If you are in an intensive care unit and just 2 or 3 patients come in and they all need immediate attention, you cannot just sit and talk about end of life care or palliative care. You just can't. And so that is already, I think, would be a major step if you understand that there's time necessary to do that. I found in my own career that that's something that I always wished to do, and probably developed on my own, to spend time and to explain things the best as I can. And you know, if you think about intensive care, you can probably just see doctors running in strobes and putting lines left and right. But up to 50% of what we do is talk with family members and go to a separate room and explain on frequently what is happening and what the goals are. And it's multidisciplinary. It's not only one person. There's a lot of people that are involved, including a chaplain or any other social work or any other persons that for which it's important, family members, to support them. And that is a culture that has changed significantly, and for the better, I think, and that's really good. And I think if you, as a family member, notice that a physician doesn't take the time, then that physician should ask someone else to take the time. And we have now is palliative care services in hospitals where there are physicians who are specifically trained in doing those conversations. There's a bit of a downside to it because you know the patient, you've been involved with the patient, you like to be involved with that, and then a newer team comes in that may have a different approach that could be, it could be different. It could be not what you would expect to occur. But in general, the palliative care services in hospitals has been extraordinarily important and have led to improvement in communication with family members, particularly now also in more acute settings. In the past, it was largely for end-stage cancer patients and talk about what would you like to do. Now it's more in the acute settings in which palliative care discusses end of life. So these are major and very good culture changes that makes it just more tolerable to get through these difficult periods of time.
There's such an amazing dialogue going on in the chat, and there's a family medicine doctor who is saying, we want these conversations to be happening much earlier. And someone else mentioned an app that you can put on your phone that reminds you 5 times a day that you're going to die. Because apparently in Burmese culture, the idea is that you will be much happier if you contemplate your death often. So, doctor, I'm just curious, how do you wish to die? And do you often contemplate your own death, or are you too busy with caring for everyone else?
Yes, I do, as everybody else. And of course, we want to go to bed and then not wake up. And that's, and then at an older age, but the truth of the matter is there is biology in nature. We will never know what's going to happen to anybody. A bit genetics too, but there is this always this concern. I don't like to think about it. There are, if you're confronted with it, you're not getting immune for it. Not
so
at all.
Think about it 5 times a day.
No, and so yes, it's going to happen. I think the good thing I know is that, and I need to mention this because it is something that is so quite important. Is that when I wrote a chapter on death and dying, I found that a lot of fictional movies show death in a very bad way and showed extraordinary suffering, including neurologic disease. Where patients were choking and the worst possible way was shown, that would give the impression that this is an enormous struggle. I don't want to downplay that for several and maybe even many patients, it's complicated and difficult, and we have to be. And end of life care is very complicated, and it includes aggressive pain management. I should say that, but that depiction is a bit of a problem, showing something that we don't need to see, and we don't have to see it, and we need to do something about it if we see it. So I thought it was interesting because it tells you that there's a misconception of it. When screenwriters feel that that's the way to depict it. It's not only drama, but it's, and of course drama is what everybody goes for, but it's also possibly one of their perception. And that's the perception of a filmmaker or screenwriter. I would think it's the perception of a lot of people that are viewing that movie.
Yeah, I actually found that section of your book incredibly comforting. You're like, it's not that bad. Dying is
No.
not that bad. But it's so true what you write. I mean, I think there's no question, and we're all aware of it in so many dimensions. There's so much misrepresentation that happens in cinema of all kinds of things. And at the same time, cinema serves so many different functions. It's the like creation of fantasies, escapism, horror movies to make us feel like we're safe. All kinds of cinema is doing all kinds of emotional things. And I also love that part of your book where you talk about the actual physical effects that watching movies can have upon us. And that certain watching, like Free Solo, watching someone climb up a rock face unhinged, like not connected to anything, can create heart palpitations in the viewer. And while I was making this movie, there was a period at which I was experiencing heart palpitations. I think like it was such a strong emotional experience making the movie that I felt in some ways like my heart was breaking on top of like trying to creatively put the movie together. But part of what I was experiencing was anticipatory grief. And I just was curious about your thoughts as we get close to wrapping it up about how the pandemic is allowing many of us who don't have the kind of connection you have to life and death all the time. Or, I've spent the last 3.5 years involved in life and death and coming back to life. But I feel like now we're in this collective shared contemplation of grief. And it's very different for each individual, but we are imagining what we have lost. We have lost things. We fear what we will lose. So I'm just curious about how anticipatory grief plays into your relationships with patients and their families.
So yeah, so the COVID epidemic has been awful, and it was necessary for hospitals to limit family visits, and sometimes periods in which families could not come at all, only when it was end of life. It's been truly awful for us, but also for family members, for both of us. It probably is also just, the last word is not said about what that's going to do. The grieving process is a complex process. It's not the classic Kubler-Ross stages that everybody thinks it is. And very different in different persons. But here you have suddenly a very new situation in which people have died with not having their loved ones at the bedside, and or not everyone at the bedside. And that is, I think, is a chapter that still will have to be written. Something we don't know how people would handle that. Is it possible to do it later? Is the resolution going to be different in people when this happens? So I think that's something that we haven't heard the last word of it, but it continues to be an awful situation. It really is.
It really is. It really is. And as you say, we're not done yet. We're in the long middle of it.
No.
And we don't know what it's doing to all of us and what it's doing to our future. There's one, I think I want to end on a question that combines such a sort of delicious combination of all of our experiences. There was someone who asked about movie watching in all of these sort of different, now that we have temporarily lost, and I am grieving it, we've temporarily lost movie theaters. This person wanted you to speak to what is the difference in the neurological experience between watching something on your iPad or your computer, watching it on your phone, watching it in a movie theater. What does that do to us differently neurologically?
I don't know, but I do know my own experience is that watching in a theater, you're far more immersed into the film than if you would watch it on a small screen. But it's all in the story, and it's all in what you're told, what determines how you respond to it.
Yes.
And there is you know there it's an entirely different field that I'm not connected to, but it's a completely different field that uses functional MRI scan and using films to figure out how people react to certain scenes. Also, it's quite interesting in criminology, I should say, where studies are done and see how would people respond to certain scenes. So yeah, there is it's a field that is emerging and would be of interest. But a good film remains a good film if it's on a small screen or in a big theater or your own home theater. It's all in the writing and in the presentation, as you know.
Well, as I feel the inspiration of so many films that like give us the wish to make stronger, better, newer, more bold. I think we're gonna wrap it up. I want to know I tried to get the clue from the book of like, what's your favorite medical movie? What is it? I couldn't figure it out.
No, and I have to blame my secretary who felt that was not needed in the book. In the neurocinema, I have my top 10 list of neurology films. In this one, I found it very difficult to come up with one movie that stands out at the 400. But if there's anything that I thought that I was really struck by is Fred Weisman's documentaries, and he has a movie called Near Death.
Yes.
That's about, and it's a 7-hour movie. Thank you very much. But if you go through it, then you can see what is really happening in hospitals, and he caught that very well. It's about the decision making of what to do. So I thought that's a film that struck me because it's close to my heart. But that was, but there's a lot of good comedies too, and there's also films that teaches you what compassion is all about. The death of Mr. Lazarescu, a Romanian movie.
Amazing movie.
I thought was terrific because it shows what's now known as compassion fatigue. When there are no resources, nobody seems to care, and that is, or people are too biased to what they see, and that is, I thought, that's a film that should be shown in every medical school to show how it's basically made as a comedy, but if you don't see it as a comedy, it's a tremendous tragedy, which almost sounds Shakespearean, but it is a film that I think would teach medical students what can happen if resources are poor, people are poor and are in bad shape, how that could impact on how you take care of them. And I thought it was a wonderful film.
It is a totally wonderful film. Say the name again because they want to know it. The Life and Death of...
No, it's the death. The life is not shown. It's the death of Mr. Lazarescu. And that sounds Romanian, but the director made sort of a hybrid of Lazarus and resuscitation. So Mr. Lazarescu is an alcoholic who has headaches, who comes in, who tries to get into an emergency room and then goes from one emergency room to another emergency room in Bucharest. Eventually, because nobody takes care of him, he eventually dies. And there's a longer story here, and there's a longer neurology and neurosurgical story here. But it shows that when the resources are so poor and there's overwhelmed hospitals, which we now know what that means. That caring of patients is sometimes very difficult.
I'm just going to say, if I ever do get a traumatic brain injury, I hope that I end up in your clinic, even if I don't know it's happening.
Yeah.
We're going to do one last question that has been asked twice because the person really wants to know about brain death. And so the question is, in your experience as the world expert on brain death, have you noticed that families of patients have more difficulty conceptualizing the idea of brain death? And if so, what have you found to be the most helpful during those conversations?
Yeah, so that occasionally occurs, perhaps a bit more now than in the past, but when someone is, you can die two ways, basically, by the heart that stops or the brain that stops. And it's not the brain, it's usually the brain stem that is the most important part. That's another conceptual change that physicians had a long time accepting, is that there's this little part underneath the brain determines determines life and death. In fact, it's the lower part of the brainstem that determines life and death, and not so much your
What's
thinking.
it called?
The brainstem.
The brain. And why don't we know these things?
How do we know that? Well, we know that we
death and brain. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, we know that. We know that for many centuries. But what we now know is that. And that happens in the 1950s. Before, when someone had a bad brain injury, the breathing just stopped, and that would be the end of it. But then the ventilators came on, put patients on ventilators, and then the brain could go on getting destroyed from swelling and what have you, and then damage the brainstem where all the vital functions are. So these patients are on the ventilator. They're warm. They're supported. And they don't look dead as you think a dead person would look like, and that is for some family members very difficult to grasp and to handle. And our task is just to explain how things work, and that this is a person that we support artificially, and that if we would withdraw that, someone would stop. The heart would stop almost immediately, and it's because we put them on life support. There's a longer discussion whether the body is alive, and whether the person can be absent and the body can be alive.
Right.
But
back to our question about self, right?
Yeah, that's and whether everything you are is in every part of your body, also known as the vitalist argument, but that's a different argument. In general, we as physicians and anybody that works in an intensive care unit, every staff that works in an intensive care unit, and particularly nursing staff, have all accepted that when the brain is dead, the person is not there anymore. And the biggest difference is it's irreversible, so nobody comes back from it. Coma, you can come back from it. Brain death is a step further. And you don't come back from it. And there will be a time that we can continue to support. I mean, we're getting better at everything. And then it opens up a tremendous ethical question whether you would continue to support a body artificially while the brain has more or less disappeared, in some situations even has liquefied to nothing. Wow. You can hardly believe that that's something you would think is acceptable, and so for us, I think the best thing we can do is clarify what we know and explain things over and over what it is, and then it's hopefully that would would come to grips with it. That's the best we can do.
Oh, well, I must tell you, I really appreciate your capacity to share this experience with all of us. And I highly recommend to all of you movie lovers this great book. And thank you so much for this conversation tonight. And thank you to Reimagine for making it happen. And to all of you amazing people who showed up. I'm just like blown away by this chat and hope that you're saving it for us so that we can look at it later somehow, because it's just really, really beautiful and warm and sophisticated questions from everybody. So I say my great thanks to all, and I look forward to all of us living as long as we possibly can without any pain and remaining ourselves.
Thank you very much. It was just such a pleasure to do.
Oh, you too.
And I'm looking forward to your next work, really.
Okay, well, I know that you're counting on me, so that helps.
Kirsten, Dr. Wadix, thank you so much for this conversation.